The first kernel of corn hit the cracked earth with a sound like a prayer falling on deaf ears, and Eliza Thornton knew every person in Dry Creek, Kansas would call her a fool before sunset. The year was 1878, and the drought had strangled the life from this corner of the plains for 3 consecutive seasons. What had once been fertile farmland stretching toward the horizon now looked like the surface of some barren, forsaken planet. The soil crumbled to dust between her fingers, gray and lifeless as ash from a long-dead fire. Her neighbors had given up one by one, packing their belongings into wagons and heading east toward more forgiving land. But Eliza had nowhere else to go. This 20 acres was all she had left of her father's dream, all that remained after the fever took him last winter. She was 22 years old, alone, and planting corn in soil everyone said was dead. The sun hammered down on her back as she worked her way across the field, dropping seeds into shallow furrows she had carved with a hand plow. Her dark hair, usually pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, had come loose in damp strands that stuck to her forehead. Her dress, a faded calico that had once been blue, was stained with sweat and dirt. Her hands bled from blisters that had burst and formed again, but she did not stop. She had calculated that she had enough seed corn to plant 5 acres if she was careful, enough water in the well to give each seedling one good drink if the rains came, and enough stubbornness to see this through even if it killed her. She did not hear the horse approach until it was nearly upon her. Eliza straightened quickly, one hand shading her eyes against the glare, the other instinctively reaching for the rifle she had left leaning against the fence post 50 yards away. Her heart hammered as she made out the silhouette of a rider leading a pack horse, moving slowly along the road that bordered her property. Strangers were not uncommon on this stretch between Dodge City and Wichita, but a woman alone had to be cautious. The rider stopped at her fence line and removed his hat, revealing a head of sun-bleached brown hair and a face weathered by years of outdoor living. He was perhaps 28 or 30, with gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, dusty denim and worn leather, a bandana around his neck, and a gun belt slung low on his hips. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying easily across the dead field, "I do not mean to intrude, but might you have water to spare? My horses are about done in from the heat." Eliza hesitated, weighing caution against common decency. Denying water to horses in this heat would be cruel, and despite everything, she had been raised better than that. "There is a trough by the barn," she called back. "Help yourself." The cowboy nodded his thanks and dismounted, leading both horses through the gate she indicated. She watched him from the corner of her eye as he watered the animals, noting the careful way he rationed the water, making sure both horses drank slowly so they would not founder. A man who knew horses then. When they had drunk their fill, he pulled a battered tin cup from his saddlebag and drank deeply himself, then refilled it and walked toward where she stood in the field. "Thought you might be thirsty too," he said, extending the cup. She was thirsty. She had been rationing her own water, allowing herself only small sips throughout the morning, but taking water from a stranger felt like crossing some invisible line, an admission of need she was not ready to make. Still, her throat was so dry it ached, and the cup was already there in his outstretched hand. "Thank you," she said, taking it. The water was warm and tasted faintly of minerals, but it was the most wonderful thing she had experienced all day. She drank half and handed it back. He finished the rest without comment. "Name is Cole Bridger," he said. "I've been driving cattle up from Texas, but the outfit I was with disbanded in Dodge City last week. I am heading north looking for work." "Eliza Thornton," she gestured at the barren expanse around them. "As you can see, I have no work to offer." Cole looked out over the field she had been planting, and she waited for the laugh, the head shake, the inevitable comment about women who did not know when to quit. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, his eyes traveling across the rows she had marked out, the small pile of seed corn in the burlap sack, the hand plow gleaming in the sun. "You are planting corn," he said finally. It was not a question, but neither was it a judgment. "I am." Everyone in town told me this land was finished, said nothing would grow here for years. "Everyone in town gave up," Eliza said, hearing the edge in her own voice. "I have not." Cole walked a few paces into the field and crouched down, scooping up a handful of soil and letting it run through his fingers. He brought some to his nose, smelling it, then brushed his hands together thoughtfully. "It is not dead," he said, "just sleeping. Soil like this, it needs organic matter, needs something to wake it up again." Eliza felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "You know farming?" "Grew up on a farm in Missouri before the war. My father used to say dead soil was just soil that had forgotten what it was meant to do." He stood, brushing dust from his knees. "You plan to water all this yourself?" "If I have to." "That well gonna hold out?" "I pray it will." Cole was quiet again, and she could see him thinking, calculating. Finally he said, "I could help you." The offer hung in the air between them. Eliza studied his face, searching for the catch. Men did not offer help without wanting something in return, and she had nothing to give. "I cannot pay you," she said bluntly. "I've barely enough money to see myself through to harvest, if there is a harvest." "Did not ask for pay," Cole said, "but I noticed your barn has a loft. If you could spare me a place to sleep and a meal now and then, I would consider us even. I have been sleeping rough for 2 weeks, and I will be honest, the thought of a roof sounds mighty fine." It was madness to agree. What would people say about her living alone on this property with a strange man in the barn? The gossips in Dry Creek would have a field day. But then, those same people already thought she was crazy for staying, for planting, for hoping. What did she have to lose that she had not already lost? "The loft is full of old hay and probably mice," she said, "but you are welcome to it if you do not mind the company." Cole smiled for the first time, and it transformed his face, making him look younger. "Ma'am, I have slept in worse places with worse company. You have a deal." They shook hands on it, her small palm disappearing into his calloused grip, and something passed between them in that moment, some understanding that neither of them could have named. They were both gamblers in their own way, betting everything on a patch of dead earth and a hope that would not die. Cole proved himself worth his keep within the first hour. He fetched tools from his pack horse, including a proper seed drill he had won in a card game in Amarillo, and they worked side by side through the afternoon, planting seed in straight, careful rows. He taught her tricks his father had taught him, about seed spacing and depth, about marking rows so you could cultivate between them once the plants came up, if they came up. Neither of them said those words aloud, but they hung in the air like a question mark over everything they did. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, Eliza called a halt to the work. "I need to see to supper," she said. "There is not much, but you are welcome to share it." The house was small, just 3 rooms her father had built with his own hands. The parlor and kitchen were one open space dominated by a cast-iron stove, with a bedroom barely large enough for a bed and a trunk partitioned off by a curtain. It was shabby and spare, but it was clean, and there were wildflowers Eliza had picked that morning in a jar on the table. Small touches of beauty in a harsh world. She made cornbread and beans, stretching the portions to feed 2, and they ate at the rough-hewn table as the last light faded from the windows. Cole ate with the steady focus of a man who had known real hunger, and he complimented the meal with a sincerity that made her cheeks warm. "You are a good cook," he said. "Better than anyone in our outfit ever was. We had a fellow who could burn water if you gave him half a chance." Eliza smiled despite herself. "It is hard to ruin beans and cornbread." "You would be surprised." Cole leaned back in his chair, cradling a cup of weak coffee between his hands. "How long have you been out here alone?" 6 months since my father passed. Before that, we managed together, though the drought was already bad." She did not mention how hard those last months had been, watching her father waste away while the land wasted around them. He bought this land in 73, right after the grasshopper plague cleared out, got it cheap because everyone thought it was cursed. He always said we would prove them wrong. Sounds like a stubborn man. He was. I suppose I take after him. She met Cole's eyes across the table. What about you? You said you grew up in Missouri? Something shuddered in his expression. Long time ago. Farm burned during the war. My mother died of grief not long after, and my father drank himself to death within a year. I have been moving ever since. Cattle drives mostly, some ranch work, whatever would pay. That sounds lonely. It was, Cole said quietly. But I did not know what else to do. Did not see much point in putting down roots when everything I had ever planted got torn up. Eliza understood that feeling more than she could say. The difference was she had decided to plant anyway, to keep putting seeds in the ground even if the world seemed determined to tear them up. Maybe that made her a fool, but it was the only way she knew how to keep living. They cleaned up the supper dishes together, an easy rhythm developing between them, as if they had done this 100 times before. When the kitchen was set to rights, Cole excused himself to the barn, and Eliza stood at her window watching his lantern bob across the yard. She wondered what she had gotten herself into, inviting a stranger into her life like this. But she also felt something she had not felt in months. Less alone. The work consumed them over the following days. They planted the remaining acres of corn, and then Cole suggested they put in a kitchen garden near the house where Eliza could water it more easily. They planted beans and squash, tomatoes and peppers, everything they could scrounge seeds for. Cole rode into Dry Creek one morning and returned with a wagon full of manure from the livery stable, which he spread carefully over the planted fields. Soil needs feeding same as people do, he explained as they worked the manure into the earth. Give it something to eat. It will wake up and remember how to live. Eliza tried not to notice how the muscles in his arms flexed as he worked, tried not to pay attention to the way he pushed his hair back from his forehead when it fell into his eyes. She failed at both. Cole Bridger was a handsome man. There was no denying that, but more than that, he was competent and kind. He never spoke down to her, never suggested that this work was too hard for a woman. He treated her as an equal partner in their unlikely endeavor. On the 5th day, clouds gathered on the western horizon. They were thin, wispy things that looked more like promises than actual rain, but Eliza found herself watching them with desperate hope. Cole saw her looking and came to stand beside her at the fence line. Might not be anything, he said gently. I know. But it might be something. I know that too. They stood there together as the clouds built through the afternoon, growing darker and more substantial. The air changed, taking on that electric quality that comes before a storm, and the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain from somewhere far away. By evening, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first fat drops began to fall. It was not much, just a brief shower that lasted maybe 20 minutes, but it was rain. Real rain falling on their newly planted fields, soaking into that dead soil and bringing something back to life. Eliza stood in her doorway watching it come down, and she did not realize she was crying until Cole appeared beside her, his own shirt soaked through. It is a start, he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. It is more than a start. It is a miracle. No, Cole said, turning to look at her. The miracle is that you believed enough to plant. The rain is just the rain doing what rain does. She looked up at him then, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. He was looking at her the way her father used to look at the land in spring, like she was full of potential and promise, like she was something worth believing in. Before she could think better of it, she reached out and took his hand. Thank you, she said, for staying, for helping, for believing too. Cole's fingers tightened around hers. Eliza, he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like the beginning of something important. But then he seemed to think better of whatever he had been about to say, and he just squeezed her hand once more before letting go and stepping back into the rain. Better make sure the barn roof is holding, he said, and then he was gone, jogging across the yard through the downpour. Eliza stood in the doorway long after he disappeared, her hands still warm from his touch, wondering what he had been about to say and why it mattered so much to her. The rain returned 3 days later, a longer, steadier soaking that turned the dust to mud and filled the air with the smell of wet earth. And then, on the 10th day after planting, Eliza saw the first green shoots pushing up through the soil. She was checking the field at first light, as had become her habit when she spotted them. Tiny, perfect corn seedlings, their leaves unfurling toward the sun. She ran to the barn, not caring that she was barefoot, not caring that her nightgown was scandalous in the morning light. "Cole!" she shouted, pounding on the barn door. "Cole! Come quick!" He emerged from the loft in his undershirt, hair standing in all directions, looking alarmed. "What is wrong? What happened?" "Nothing is wrong." She was laughing and crying at the same time, grabbing his hand and pulling him toward the field. "Look, just look." They ran together through the wet grass, and when they reached the field, Eliza pointed at the green shoots standing like tiny soldiers in their straight rows. Cole dropped to his knees beside them, touching the seedlings with a gentleness that made something in Eliza's chest ache. "They are growing," he whispered. "That dead soil. And they are growing." "We did it," Eliza said. "Cole, we actually did it." He looked up at her, his face breaking into the widest smile she had ever seen him wear, and then he was on his feet and she was in his arms, both of them laughing like children. He spun her around once, twice, and when he set her down, they were both breathless and grinning, and his hands were still on her waist. The laughter faded slowly, replaced by something heavier, more electric than the air before a storm. Cole's thumbs moved against her sides, barely perceptible through the thin fabric of her nightgown, and Eliza realized suddenly how improper this was, how close they were standing, how the morning light turned his eyes the color of rain clouds. She should step back. She should remember propriety and reputation and all the rules that governed how unmarried women were supposed to behave. She did not step back. "Eliza," Cole said again, and this time he did not stop himself. "I need to tell you something. I did not plan on staying here. When I offered to help, I thought maybe a week, 2 at most, just long enough to rest and earn a few meals. But now I do not want to leave. I do not want to move on to the next town, the next job, the next empty place. I want to stay here and see these crops grow tall. I want to help you prove everyone wrong. I want—" He paused, searching for words. "I want to plant something that does not get torn up." "Cole," she whispered, and it was both a question and an answer. He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious that might break. Eliza had been kissed before, brief, stolen moments at church socials and barn dances, but nothing like this. This kiss felt like rain on dead soil, like seeds splitting open in darkness, like everything dead and dormant waking up and remembering how to live. She kissed him back with all the loneliness and hope and desperate faith that had kept her planting when everyone said to quit. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I am not a rich man," he said. "I have a horse, some tools, and about $40 to my name. But if you will have me, I would like to stay, not just for the harvest, but for good. I would like to make a life here, with you, on this land that everyone said was dead." Eliza felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so wide it hurt. "Yes," she said, "yes, Cole Bridger, I will have you. I will have you for all the seasons to come, for all the planting and growing and harvesting. I will have you forever if you will stay." They married 3 weeks later in Dry Creek, in the small church where Eliza's father was buried in the cemetery out back. The preacher seemed uncertain about the union, asking 3 times if Eliza was sure about marrying a drifter she had known less than a month. But when she said yes each time without hesitation, he performed the ceremony. They had no guests besides the preacher's wife and the store owner, who served as witnesses, but Eliza wore wildflowers in her hair and Cole washed his face until it shone, and when he slipped the simple gold band on her finger, it felt like the most important moment of her life. The corn grew high that summer, defying all predictions and expectations. The stalks stretched toward the sky, their leaves rustling in the wind like whispered conversations. The kitchen garden flourished, too, producing more vegetables than two people could eat. Eliza canned and preserved, filling shelves in the root cellar with jars of tomatoes and beans and pickles, preparing for the winter with a hope she had not felt in years. Cole proved to be more than just a farmer. He had a gift for fixing things, for seeing how broken pieces could be made whole again. He repaired the barn roof and the fence line, built a new chicken coop, and crafted a rocking chair for the porch from wood he salvaged from an old wagon. In the evenings, they would sit together on that porch, watching the sun set over their growing crops, and Eliza would lean against his shoulder, feeling more content than she had ever imagined possible. But life on the plains was never easy, and the challenges kept coming. In late July, grasshoppers descended on the region in clouds so thick they blocked out the sun. Eliza stood in the yard watching them come, feeling her heart sink into her stomach. They had survived the drought and coaxed life from dead soil, only to have it all eaten before their eyes. Cole saw her expression and took her hand. "We fight," he said simply. "We do not give up now." They spent 3 days battling the grasshoppers, using every trick they knew. They burned green willow branches to create smoke that drove some of the insects away. They covered the garden with sheets and blankets, weighing down the edges with stones. They walked the corn rows with sticks, knocking grasshoppers from the stalks and crushing them underfoot. It was exhausting, disgusting work, and there were moments when Eliza wanted to weep at the futility of it. But Cole never wavered. He kept working, kept fighting, and his determination gave her strength. On the evening of the third day, the grasshoppers moved on, following some instinct that pulled them east. The damage was significant, but not catastrophic. They had lost perhaps a quarter of the corn and half the garden, but the rest survived. When it was over, Eliza and Cole collapsed together on the porch steps, exhausted and filthy and triumphant. "We did it again," Eliza said wonderingly. "We saved the crops." Cole pulled her close, kissing her temple. "We are a good team, Mrs. Bridger." She loved the sound of that. Loved being Mrs. Bridger, loved having a partner in this fight to make something grow in an unforgiving land. "The best team," she agreed. August brought heat that shimmered off the fields in visible waves. The corn was tall now, the stalks reaching well over their heads, the ears forming fat and heavy. Cole taught Eliza to check them for ripeness, peeling back the husks to reveal the kernels inside, judging by color and feel when they would be ready for harvest. Every evening they walked the rows together, and every evening the corn looked better, fuller, more like the miracle everyone said was impossible. Word began to spread in Dry Creek about the crops growing on the Thornton place. People who had dismissed Eliza as a foolish girl who did not know when to quit started showing up at the fence line, staring at the tall corn with expressions ranging from disbelief to envy. Some of them asked questions, wanting to know what she had done differently, how she had coaxed life from soil they had all given up on. Eliza, remembering how alone she had felt when they all left, was gracious but cool in her answers. Cole was less diplomatic. When Albert Jennings, who owned the property to the east, came sniffing around asking about their methods, Cole looked him dead in the eye and said, "The difference is we did not quit. We believed when no one else would. Maybe think about that before planting next spring." Jennings left red-faced and sputtering, and Eliza kissed her husband's cheek. "That was not very neighborly," she said, but she was smiling. "Some people need to hear hard truths," Cole replied. "He made your life harder by leaving, by spreading talk that this land was finished. I will not forget that." Eliza loved him fiercely in that moment, loved that he defended her even against slights she had half forgiven. "You are a good man, Cole Bridger," she said. "I am your man," he corrected, That is all that matters. They harvested the corn in September, working from dawn until dusk to bring in the crop before the first frost. It was backbreaking labor, cutting the stalks and stripping the ears, hauling everything to the barn where they would shell the kernels and store them for winter. But it was good work, satisfying work, and every wagon load they brought in felt like a victory over everyone who had said it could not be done. When the last ear was harvested and stored, Cole did the calculations. They had brought in nearly 200 bushels from 5 acres, a yield that was respectable even in good years. Miraculous considering what the soil had looked like when they started. At current prices, that corn would earn them enough money to see them comfortably through the winter and buy seed for next spring with plenty to spare. "We did it," Eliza said, staring at the numbers Cole had written in his careful hand. "We really, truly did it." "You did it," Cole said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on top of her head. "You believed when no one else did. You planted in dead soil and brought it back to life. I just helped." Eliza turned in his embrace, looking up into his face. "We did it together," she insisted. "I would have failed without you. The first rain would have washed away half the seeds because I did not know to plant them right. The grasshoppers would have taken everything. I needed you, Cole. I still need you." He kissed her then, deep and slow. A kiss that said everything words could not quite capture. When they broke apart, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I love you, Eliza Bridger," he said. "I loved you from the moment I saw you planting corn in that dead soil, refusing to quit even when every logical person would have. You are the stubbornest, bravest woman I have ever known." "I love you too," she whispered. "You made me believe I was not crazy for hoping. You taught me that faith is stronger when it is shared." That winter was long and cold, but they weathered it together in the small house, keeping each other warm through the bitter nights. Cole read to Eliza from books he bought at the store in town, adventure stories and poetry that transported them far from the frozen plains. Eliza taught Cole to cook more than just basic trail food, and they experimented with recipes using their preserved vegetables, laughing over failures and celebrating successes. In January, during a brief warm spell, they made plans for spring. They would plant 10 acres this year, doubling their crop. They would add a few pigs and maybe a milk cow if they could afford it. Cole wanted to expand the barn, and Eliza dreamed of a real parlor with proper furniture and maybe even wallpaper. They sketched their dreams on paper, mapping out the future they would build together. When Eliza missed her monthly courses in February, she said nothing at first, not wanting to hope too soon. But when March came and went with the same result, she could no longer deny what her body was telling her. On a bright morning with the first hints of spring in the air, she told Cole over breakfast. "I am pregnant," she said simply, watching his face. The fork dropped from his hand, clattering on the plate. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. 3 months now without bleeding, and I have been sick most mornings." Cole was around the table in 2 strides, pulling her up into his arms and holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. They had never discussed children, never planned for this. He pulled back just far enough to look at her face, and his eyes were wet with tears. "Happy? Eliza, I am happier than I have ever been in my life. A baby. Our baby. Another crop growing in soil that everyone said was dead." She laughed at that, at the perfect rightness of the metaphor. "Another miracle," she agreed. "The biggest miracle," Cole said, dropping to his knees and pressing his face against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your mama and I are going to love you so much. We are going to teach you about planting and growing and never giving up on things that matter. We are going to give you the best life we know how." Eliza ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had appeared in her life just when she needed him most, who had helped her prove that dead things could live again, that faith and stubborn work could overcome any obstacle. They planted their crops that spring with new purpose, knowing they were building not just for themselves now, but for the child coming in the fall. The soil was better this year, richer from the organic matter they had worked into it, darker and more alive. The corn seeds went into the ground like tiny promises, and when they sprouted just days after planting, Eliza felt her own body growing and changing in parallel, creating life from mysterious inner resources. The summer was kinder than the one before. The rains came when they were needed, and the grasshoppers stayed away. Eliza's belly swelled as the corn grew tall, both of them reaching towards some inevitable harvest. Cole was protective to the point of being overbearing, insisting she not lift heavy things or work too long in the sun. She chafed at the restrictions, but loved him for caring. In late July, Cole finished building a cradle from wood he had carefully chosen and planned smooth. He carved their initials into the headboard along with the year 1879, creating an heirloom that would outlast them both. Eliza sewed tiny gowns and blankets from fabric she bought in town, every stitch an act of hope and love. The corn reached higher than it had the year before, the stalks thick and strong, the ears heavy and full. People came from as far as Dodge City to see the fields that had been coaxed back to life, and some of the neighboring farmers swallowed their pride and asked Cole for advice on preparing their own land for next year. He was generous with his knowledge, remembering how hard it had been to feel alone and hopeless. "The soil wants to live," he told them. "You just have to give it what it needs and believe it can come back." Some took his advice, others did not. But seeds were planted in more ways than one, ideas spreading about land restoration and second chances. Eliza went into labor on a cool September evening, just as they were preparing to start the harvest. Cole rode for the doctor in Dry Creek, but the baby had other plans. By the time he returned with the doctor and the preacher's wife, who served as midwife, Eliza had already delivered a healthy baby boy with lungs that could wake the dead. "You could not wait for help," Cole said, somewhere between laughter and tears as he held his son for the first time. "He is like his father," Eliza said tiredly, "arrives when he's needed and gets right to work." They named him Thomas, after Eliza's father, who had bought this land and believed it could flourish. Thomas Cole Bridger, a name that honored the past and promised the future. He was perfect, from his shock of dark hair to his tiny, grasping fingers, and when Cole placed him in the cradle he had made, both parents stood over him in wonder, hardly able to believe what they had created. "Another crop growing high," Eliza whispered. The harvest that year was even better than the first, nearly 400 bushels from 10 acres. They sold most of it at premium prices to buyers who had heard about the miracle farm in Dry Creek, keeping enough back for seed and their own needs. With the money, they paid off the last of her father's debts, bought lumber to expand the house, and put away a nest egg for Thomas's future. The expansion took shape over the following winter, Cole working with the help of some of the neighboring farmers who had decided to try his methods and wanted to show their gratitude. They added a proper parlor and a second bedroom, plus a larger kitchen with a new stove that did not smoke. Eliza hung curtains she had sewn herself and placed the wildflowers Thomas's grandfather had loved in the windows. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. The land continued to produce each harvest a little better than the last as the soil grew richer and more alive. They added chickens and pigs, then a milk cow named Bessie, who Thomas loved to pet. The farm became prosperous enough that they hired help during harvest season, providing work for young men looking to learn farming from the couple who had brought dead land back to life. Thomas grew strong and healthy, learning to walk in the furrows between corn rows, his first words a mixture of mama and papa and corn. By the time he was 3, he had his own small plot in the garden where he planted beans and radishes, learning the same lessons his parents had learned about faith and persistence. In the spring of 1882, Eliza found herself pregnant again. This time, Cole was prepared, hiring a woman from town to help with the housework, and Thomas as Eliza's pregnancy progressed. The baby, a girl they named Sarah Grace, arrived on a warm June morning, her birth easy compared to her brother's dramatic entrance. She had Eliza's dark eyes and Cole's stubborn chin, and Thomas was immediately smitten with his baby sister. The farm continued to grow and thrive. Cole and Eliza became known throughout the region as the couple who had refused to quit, who had planted corn in dead soil and made it grow tall. People came to ask their advice, to learn their methods, to draw inspiration from their story. They were generous with their knowledge, never forgetting what it felt like to struggle alone. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Cole took Eliza out to the original 5 acres where it had all begun. The soil was dark and rich now, full of life and promise, unrecognizable from the gray dust it had been when they met. The corn was already knee-high, the stalks rustling in the evening breeze. "Do you remember that first day?" Cole asked, his arm around her waist. "When I stopped for water and saw you planting all alone? I remember thinking you were going to tell me I was crazy, Eliza said. "I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen. I still do." She leaned into him, watching the sun set over their fields, over the life they had built from nothing but faith and stubborn work. "We did something impossible," she said. "We made dead things live again." "We did it together," Cole corrected. "Everything good in my life comes from the day I stopped at your fence line and you gave me water. You saved me, Eliza. You taught me that it is never too late to plant something, never too late to believe in growth and second chances." "You saved me too," she said. "I would have broken trying to do it alone. You gave me strength when mine ran out." They stood together in the gathering dusk, 2 people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had believed when no one else would, who had planted love in dead soil and watched it grow tall and strong and fruitful. Behind them the house glowed with lamplight, and they could hear Thomas singing to Sarah, teaching her a song about corn growing high. "Come on," Eliza said, taking Cole's hand. "Let us go home." They walked back through their fields, through the corn that had defied every prediction, past the garden and the barn and the chicken coop, to the house they had built together. It was a good life, a life they had fought for and earned, a life that would continue growing like good crops in rich soil, season after season, harvest after harvest. The crops grew high that year and every year after, and so did their family, their love, their faith in what could be accomplished when 2 stubborn souls refused to give up on dead things on each other, on the stubborn belief that with enough care and work and hope, anything could be brought back to life and made to flourish. Years later, when Thomas was grown and farming his own land, when Sarah was married with children of her own, when Cole's hair had gone silver and Eliza's hands were gnarled with arthritis, they still walked their fields together every evening. The original 5 acres had become 50, then 100, a testament to what 2 people could build when they believed in something bigger than themselves. "I have been thinking," Cole said one evening as they made their slow way along the fence line, "about that first day, about how close I came to just riding past your farm." "What stopped you?" Eliza asked, though she had heard this story 100 times and never tired of it. "The water," Cole said with a smile. "I stopped for water. But I stayed because I saw a woman planting corn in dead soil, refusing to accept what everyone told her was true. I stayed because I recognized something in you, some spark that matched the one I had lost and was trying to find again." "You found it," Eliza said. "We found it together." "Best thing I ever did," Cole agreed, "stopping for water and staying for love." They stood together watching the sunset, just as they had done thousands of times before, just as they would continue to do for whatever days remained to them. The corn rustled around them, tall and green and heavy with promise, proof that dead soil could live again, that stubborn faith could move mountains, that love planted in the right conditions could grow higher and stronger than anyone ever imagined possible. And when they finally turned to walk back to their house, back to the family and life they had built from nothing but hope and hard work, they did so hand in hand, 2 hearts beating in the rhythm of the seasons, 2 souls that had found in each other exactly what they needed to become everything they were meant to be. The land that everyone said was dead had become the most fertile farm in the county, and the love that had grown alongside those impossible crops remained just as strong, just as vital, a living testament to the power of refusing to quit, of planting seeds even when everyone said nothing would grow, of believing in miracles until they had no choice but to come true. Their story became legend in Dry Creek and beyond, passed down through generations as an example of what could be accomplished when faith met action, when stubbornness served a higher purpose, when two people who needed each other found themselves at exactly the right moment and decided to plant something beautiful together. And every spring, when farmers throughout Kansas prepared their fields for planting, some of them would remember the story of Eliza Thornton and Cole Bridger, the woman who planted corn in dead soil and the cowboy who helped her make it grow tall, and they would face their own challenges with a little more hope, a little more determination, a little more belief that dead things could live again if given enough care and faith and love. The corn always grew high on the Bridger farm, reaching toward the sky with the same stubborn persistence as the woman who first planted it and the man who believed in her dream. And the love that had taken root alongside those first impossible seeds grew just as high, just as strong, flourishing through all the seasons of their lives until the very end, when they passed from this world knowing they had accomplished something rare and precious. They had proved that nothing is ever truly dead if someone is brave enough to believe it can live again, stubborn enough to do the work required, and fortunate enough to find a partner who shares that impossible, beautiful faith.